Well, the war isn't taking only a terrible human toll, it also takes a toll on an economy that needs all the help it can get. Our next guest, though, says Iraq is a great place to do business. Baroness Emma Nicholson is Britain's trade envoy to the country. She recently returned from a visit there and will be back in a month or so. Baroness, thank you for joining us tonight. With the sort of escalation of violence that we are seeing, particularly in the oil-producing regions, how can this be a good investment at this point?
Iraq is indeed growing dramatically in terms of private investment and in terms of output in oil and gas and construction infrastructure. I had a meeting this afternoon with some of the financial and professional services sectors, PwC, Standard Chartered, Deloitte and so on. And Iraq is most definitely growing at the rate of 10% a year and has the highest potential growth rate in the region. But on the other hand, as you have shown us with this devastating family, there are tragedies every day and every evening. Yeah.
OK, and we can chuck growth numbers around. I mean, 10% would be incredible, given that this... And I understand why you're saying that, but given that we are seeing this spiral in violence and the fact that the United Nations has warned that Iraq must address the roots of this conflict to stop what it calls an infernal cycle of violence. Now, you know the Prime Minister well. If he wants those sort of growth figures going forward, quite frankly, this is a man whose policies, many people say, have prompted this violence. What do you say to him, and how does he suggest a solution at this point?
Well, the United Nations, as you know, Mr. Nikolai Mladenov, who represents the United Nations in Iraq, is adamant that the violence must stop. One of the great difficulties, of course, is the Sunni-Shia violence coming out of Syria, which has been spilling over into Iraq for much more than a year. Only a year ago, I visited one of the biggest refugee camps I've ever been in, which was in the north of Iraq, in Iraqi Kurdistan. And they've come in all the way, all this year, right into Anbar. I think there's nearly under 500,000 Syrian refugees, and much of the violence is stemming from that. But nonetheless, Iraq is growing. The big companies coming in, particularly from the West, Britain, America, France and Germany and Italy, they have great standards. They're doing big things. 80% of Iraq's oil and gas is coming from the two big BP Shell consortia, for example.
Does it bother businessmen who want to do business in a place that undoubtedly has great growth prospects because it's coming from such a sort of basic position at this top point? Does it bother these sort of famously hardened businessmen that effectively, you know, as a civil war burns around them, they can sort of pick off, as it were, great growth opportunities? And I don't mean to sound sort of, you know, pessimistic about things, but I think our viewers will be interested to see the sort of mentality of those who are prepared to go in.
The human suffering is massive. I absolutely take every point that you're making. I chair a small charity called the Ammar Foundation, and we have doctors and nurses, all Iraqi, working all around the clock in these horrific situations. But at the same time, the Iraq-Britain Business Council and being trade envoy for Iraq from the United Kingdom, that's a highly positive signal. All the big companies that are there, they are doing wonderfully well. It's tough, it's hard, but the point is that if we don't go, if there isn't a private sector, my goodness me, Iraq is going to not do very well indeed. Iraq has massive potential, and yes, there are huge challenges, and the worst of all is the suffering of that family and thousands like them.
Sure, and I guess my final question then is this: with the huge potential that it has, are the Iraqis going to benefit as those that you represent and support will benefit going forward? I guess that's the ultimate question. And very briefly,
the Iraqis themselves are already benefiting dramatically. Most of the contracts, for instance, that Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Sharistani gets signed on oil and gas, and those that Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Sharways works out with other businesses, they all say a very high proportion of the workers and the skilled workers and the managers must be Iraqi. But there is, of course, a big deficit in education and training, and that's why universities and tertiary education and the learning of English as a business language is absolutely critical. The future is very good indeed, but my goodness me, it's a tough struggle to get there. But that's no reason not to be in there to help.